We are live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January 19th meeting of the East Hampton Town Board. Carol, would you please read the roll call?
Councilwoman Burke Gonzalez.
Present.
Councilman Lees.
Present.
Councilwoman Overby.
Here.
Councilman Bragman.
Here.
Supervisor Van Scoyac.
Present. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of
America,
for
for which it stands,
one
nation
nation
under
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This morning's meeting will have a public portion where any member of the public may address the board on any topic, and that will be followed by topics of the bids. Jeannie Croza, our purchasing agent, a discussion of comments that the town board received regarding South Fork Wind Farm easements and host community agreements, a discussion about UR Road abandonment moratorium, and the CPF 2021 Management and Stewardship Plan. And that'll be followed by liaison reports and resolutions. But before we get started, Sylvia Overby, our councilwoman, who's also the liaison to the Anti-Bias Task Force, would like to read a letter that the Anti-Bias Task Force has prepared in response to the siege on the Capitol on January 6th.
Yes, thank you, Peter. The statement was completed just yesterday, so I just wanted to make sure that it gets heard by the public. I think it's a very important statement. The East Hampton Town Anti-Bias Task Force unequivocally condemns the violence committed at our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, and the ongoing lies that inspired it. Further, we as residents of the town of East Hampton reject in the strongest terms possible the despicable symbols of hate on display that day, including nooses, Confederate flags, and neo-Nazi slogans. History has shown us that the inherent cruelty in these images and the ideology they symbolize must never be allowed to take root in our nation and in our communities again. We dishonor the memory of the hundreds of thousands of American lives lost in the Civil War, World War II, and in the struggle for civil and voting rights if we stay silent in the face of intolerance. Our children are watching, and they look to us now for guidance and reassurance in a time of unrest. So we ask our community to please join us at the Anti-Bias Task Force in renewing our commitment to promoting diversity, unity, and understanding as we do the work of healing together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Appreciate those comments. And I know the board members have issued statements and comments and videos on LTV about this as well. I think it's really important that we come together and recognize those events for really what they were, and that we do everything we can to redouble our commitment to our democracy and to the Constitution, and equal treatment under the law for all. So thank you for taking the time to do that. At this point, we'll open up the meeting to public comments. Do we have any callers on the line, Michael? Michael, we can't hear you.
I apologize, Mr. Supervisor. We are open, our lines are available, and there are no callers on the line. I'm just reassuring the public that our lines are open and available.
Very good. Appreciate that. Thank you. In that case, I would like to move on. We have Jeannie Croza, who's our purchasing department head. And Jeannie, you have some bids that you have to present to us.
Yes, I do. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First, I'll start off with a couple of extensions. First is the audit services for Community Preservation Fund, and that's with Cullen and Danowski in the amount of $10,200. Next is the extension for the annual contract for glass replacement and repair work for automobiles, trucks, and equipment, Safe Flight Fulfillment. Going to accept a couple of bids. The annual generator maintenance contract, and that is with Commander Power Systems Incorporated. Next, we did a rebid for the snow plowing at the East Hampton Airport. Southampton Excavation and Site Development is the apparent low bidder for that, meeting all the criteria in that bid. And lastly, I'll have 3 notices for human services. That's with the supply and delivery of the frozen food, the dairy products, and groceries. And that's all.
Any questions for Jeannie? Okay, Jeannie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next up, we have a discussion of comments that we received from the public regarding the South Fork Wind Farm and specifically the easement agreements and host community benefits agreements. And, at this point, the town board has, in coordination with the town trustees for more than 4 years, been reviewing proposed plans to land the transport cable within the town from the South Fork Wind Farm. This would be a renewable energy project that is in alignment with the town's goals for 100% renewable energy. It has undergone exhaustive review by both of our boards, holding countless, dozens at this point, of meetings with the public to hear directly from the public about any concerns and to make sure that we address any of the possible impacts and that they are properly mitigated through a process. And in addition to the necessary review by both state and federal agencies, which number well over 20, the town board and trustees both felt that it was important to engage directly to ensure that our interests here within the town of East Hampton were properly addressed. And, over the course of nearly 3 years of negotiating these easement leases and host community benefits, we've enumerated no less than 150 places where the grantee shall have to comply with our regulations. We've had exhaustive review by outside counsel, professionals in these specific fields of public service, certificates and renewable energy. Both the trustees and the town board engaged outside counsel. We have 2 different firms working for us, and the trustees have one working with them, as well as our own in-house counsels who work alongside each other. In a coordinated effort, we've been able to negotiate more than $29 million in benefits to the town of East Hampton and for the host community. We've had outside engineers and environmental consultants that we've had on board to help us in crafting these negotiations and easements, and to ensure that concerns that we might have about mitigating noise or other environmental impacts are properly addressed. At this point, with so much being done, I personally didn't hear anything new in terms of comments coming in from the public that we hadn't already considered, and we feel that we've properly addressed. Our outside counsel has assured us that all of our aspects of the easements are within the law. We're not giving any exemptions for compliance with safety. They're specifically enumerated within the easement agreements, contrary to some of the comments that we've received thus far. And again, I think if people have concerns, they should go back and read the documents. At this point, they've been made public for well over a month. And we did receive, a number of callers, and I'd say the vast majority of callers actually were calling in support of the project and urging us to move forward. We are now just completed the year 2020, much to I think support of everyone to move on from 2020, but one of the negative effects that we saw in 2020 was the record high temperature on our planet to date. And every year it gets warmer. Every year that we continue to burn fossil fuels, we continue to pollute our atmosphere, our water bodies. We need to move away from fossil fuels. This project will help us do so and meet 100% renewable energy goals that the town has had in place since 2014. I want to commend all of my fellow board members for their careful attention to this matter over many years. And I believe personally that we're at a point now where we should move forward. I know that there's always going to be dissent. You're never going to have a unanimous decision on nearly anything in today's society. But I want to reassure the public that we will continue to ensure that all the mitigation and minimization of any impacts are followed up on. There's still a federal process and PSC process that is ongoing. And we intend to be fully engaged in that as we move forward. And I would open it up to the other board members for comment.
I do want to say just quickly that I really commend this town board and the leadership that they have shown. And, East Hampton is known as being a leader in environmental issues. And certainly this is one of the things where we can look proudly at not only our entire community, Wainscott, all the way to Montauk, that they have supported this. And that I'm proud that we, again, are leaders in environmental issues for the entire nation. We were one of the first to have 100% renewable in the state of New York, and for our goal for our town. And as we move forward, this is, I think, an important issue that we, again, show that leadership to the country, if not just to Long Island, but also to the entire country. So I thank the town board for their support.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. Any other comments from board members at this point? In that case, I'd like to.
I have some comments. I didn't realize we would begin with town board comments, but so be it. And my comments are not about supporting or not supporting wind power. I support wind power, and I think it's a necessary component of our ability to handle the global warming crisis, which is an existential crisis. I firmly believe that. I wanted to raise some questions, though, directed at not at wind power to have wind power to not have wind power, but questions that deal with just ordinary negotiation tactics. And I have a couple points because I did take the time over the last couple of weeks to look over the document. So some of this may be questions that our attorney can clarify. I'm not the lawyer on this project, but I tried to read it and understand it clearly. I had to dive into a somewhat technical issue. The applicant is going to give us a damage deposit to cover both the work in Wainscott and the decommissioning work. It's $1.5 million. If I read the agreement correctly, the way it's written is that if they fail to perform in any way, we can use the money that they tender as a letter of credit or a bond. We can use $1.5 million and we can finish the work. What I didn't like about that paragraph in that agreement is that it says that if that happens, the company has no further liability. And that puts a slightly different color on the damage deposit, because in effect, by saying that if once we draw that money, if they haven't performed, that they have no further liability, it really turns that $1.5 million into a damage cap. It just caps their liability. And I think it raises an issue as to whether or not it's written in terms that make it something of a walkaway provision. I call it a walkaway provision because it would enable the applicant to walk away and not have any liability, which I don't think is favorable to the town. So I had a question about that. I also wanted to talk about an issue that has been a serious one in Wainscott, and that is the presence of perfluorinated chemicals. For the folks watching at home, those are the chemicals that contaminated Wainscott's groundwater and made us bring in public water. The easement agreement says that remediation includes all hazardous materials involved in the project, essentially. But it actually, the way it's phrased causes me a little bit of concern, because it says that the agreement requires remediation for all hazardous materials identified to exist solely as a result of construction, installation, and maintenance. And that word solely bothered me a little bit in thinking about the possible presence of perfluorinated chemicals in the area.
So Jeff,
Hold on. I want to get through this, Peter,
Yeah,
without interruption. And then you have lawyers on the line. They can correct me if I'm wrong, whatever. But I don't want to get into a debate point by point, if I may. So my question, as looking at that language, is suppose they start digging, and they put in the vaults and they expose contaminated water. It's not solely caused by their digging that those PFAS chemicals are scattered over the property. So my question is, are they responsible for remediating that? And also, I know that we've been concerned about it, and the company just completed 34 soil borings that also included water samples. And I assume that they're testing for the presence of PFAS. And if you look at the map of the borings, there is some question about the proximity of those borings to areas that have been reported to have high levels of PFAS. So to date, we have not had disclosure of the test results from those wells, partly because they embarked on drilling the wells after the close of the evidentiary hearing. So to me, it raises a question about what their responsibilities are with reference to the possibility of perfluorinated chemicals, whether they would have liability, and what their responsibility would be to clean up and mitigate if they encounter a problem. They also mention, incidentally, hazardous materials, and they indicate in the agreement that they may actually have that they're permitted to have hazardous materials that they deem necessary in the course of their business. And to date, despite our negotiations with between the lawyers, we have no idea what kind of chemicals they may store or use in connection with their drilling muds. And I've heard the company say occasionally, well, we don't know until we see the conditions in the ground. But that's plainly something that they could identify and that we don't know yet. So that is a concern to me as well. Also, the way the process works, I mean, it is true that we've spent a lot of time negotiating the language of these agreements. And, lawyers have trouble doing that. It's hard to get the English language to be precise enough to cover all, sorts of contingencies in the plans. But what I noticed, just, stepping back and looking at the agreements from, a little bit greater distance that we have now that they're all together, is that really the plans, the specific plans don't exist yet. And they won't exist yet because they're not going to be drawn up until later. So while we did minimally talk to a sound expert, we have no idea what their sound buffering wall will look like, where it's going to be placed. Same thing with parking. Same thing with the transiting of traffic. They've assured us in verbiage, that they're going to keep it open for bikes and pedestrians, but we've never seen a plan that we could actually review. The same is true for soil, contaminated soil handling. They've indicated in verbiage, we'll be responsible for contaminated soils, but we haven't seen the plan. We don't know what it is. Same thing about vegetation management. Same thing about animal and habitat management. Same thing about avian bird protection. All those plans are not going to be developed until the end of the process in the environmental management and construction plan timeframe. Same thing about a lighting plan. Same thing about night deliveries in Wainscott. We don't have a specific plan. Same thing about temporary obstructions for unavoidable deliveries at night. Same thing for the routes for traffic. We don't have a plan for that. Same thing for mitigation of impacts to water courses or wetlands. We have an assurance from the applicant that they'll do all that's reasonably necessary, but we don't have a plan. The same is true for the operation of concrete batch operations, fueling, repairing of vehicles, protection of water supply wells. Again, we have verbal assurances, but we don't have a plan, and we've never looked at a plan. Same thing with the dewatering plan, which could be very important in connection with the issue of the presence of perfluorinated chemicals. The same is true for the soil erosion and disposal and treatment plan. We don't have a plan. It's not going to happen until significantly later in the process. The same is true for the storage of petroleum or hazardous materials. The same is true for the stormwater management plan. The same is true for the restoration plan, the remediation plan, the decommission plan, the lighting plan, the fence plan. So the point is, and I think it was made by, some of the residents perhaps more directly, what they've asked us, have you had your experts looking over these plans and helping us? And I think it's not correct to say that we have done that. We have rigorously negotiated these agreements, the verbiage in the agreements, but we have not actually looked at these plans. And, if there are any folks who think like, well, they don't want to do these plans until they get to the stage when they have their permission, that's not a very persuasive position to take. This is almost a $2 billion project. It probably will be a $2 billion project. So there's plenty of money to develop these plans. We just haven't insisted on them. One of the issues that's really important to us locally, to the local fishing community, is Cox's Ledge and what's going to happen to it, because it's an extremely valuable habitat for cod and black sea bass, highly valuable fish, and both of which constitute, very valuable American industries. Practically, cod is really, one of the characteristics closely tied to the American identity. We've fished cod for 400 years, 500 years. We almost collapsed the cod stocks at one time, but they're coming back. And right now, as we speak, and as we're ready to sign this agreement, this agency in Washington that seems far away and is big agency, huge agency, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, even the name sounds a little daunting, is reviewing that important issue. That's really probably the most important local environmental issue that occurs out on the, it's probably the most important environmental issue that occurs out in the sea that affects us locally. What's going to happen to Cox's Ledge? And we've heard a lot of talk about this for many years, as Peter has said. But that issue is now just beginning to be decided by this Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And there are problems in resolving how the deep water turbines can fit in a way that mitigates impacts to Cox's Ledge. And it's all well and good to say, well, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is going to take care of that, and that's fine. So we're just going to let that happen. And I think for most of us, including me, even having been involved in environmental issues, the thought of us trying to influence a huge federal agency is quite daunting. So I just wanted to bring up, a smaller point about leverage and negotiation. We probably, we're like the mouse that roared. If we try to put in comments, we can put in a couple of comments, about the draft environmental impact statement dealing with Cox's Ledge. Are we going to move the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management? It's probably doubtful given the realities, but we have tremendous leverage with the applicant if we don't sign the agreement at this premature point. It seems to me, just as a matter of ordinary negotiation, that we have much more power over the fate of Cox's Ledge by holding off on signing these agreements, because we know it's obvious that Deepwater needs its beach lane access. They're not going elsewhere. They need beach lane. The agreements refer to beach lane. it's clear that's what's anticipated. And I'm not suggesting, saying no to deep water. I'm not suggesting saying no to wind power. But I am saying that as a matter of common sense, we have significant leverage right now with deep water. And it makes sense to wait and see how BOEM resolves the issue. There's an issue because Deepwater gave away part of its leasehold to a related company. So there's very little room to move where they want to put the turbines. And an agency that's been deeply involved in protecting Cox's Ledge is the Rhode Island Coastal Resource Management Council. And they're concerned that if Deepwater maintains its 1 nautical mile by 1 nautical mile grid pattern, that they may not be able to adequately mitigate impacts to Cox's Ledge. And it seems to me that if we really want to have some impact and be a player here and actually exert some influence to protect our local fishing community, this is a perfect time to say to Deepwater, great, we think we have the agreements we want, the written agreements. We'd like to see the plans. I think that would be important. I think the next phase that we should go through is to have serious engineering and environmental and fish experts look over plans. So we're not just talking about the English language. And we could also monitor what's going on at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And we could have a real voice in protecting Cox's Ledge because we have the power to say, we don't like it. We want a better plan. But we only have that power as long as we hold off on signing these documents prematurely. And I think this is a premature time. And the last thing I wanted to say is that there's been not very much attention paid to the fact that the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, exists and has been commenting on wind power proposals. And NYSERDA is an independent authority. An authority is separate from a governmental entity because it keeps them independent. And what NYSERDA has said in no uncertain terms is that we shouldn't be approving wind farms that are less than 400 megawatts. And the reason they're saying that is because they're not economical, that the amount of cost that you put in isn't offset by the benefit of the pricing of the energy. That's a fact. That is a fact that NYSERDA has said that. And it is also a fact that Ørsted Eversource has commented favorably on that policy. They've agreed with that policy in public. And this is related. So this is related to the pricing of the energy, which we know is double the pricing of the energy of a very nearby wind farm. Sunrise Wind Farm is only 3 nautical miles away. And the other thing I wanted to say is it's also related to the $29 million, which, have our eyes opened wide. We're clearly very focused on the $29 million. And I wanted to say, again, we have a lot of leverage until we sign these documents. But more importantly, I think it's important to keep in mind that this $29 million it's not free money. This is not money falling from the sky. This money is being generated by the ratepayers who will be paying the excessive pricing on Deepwater. And that should give us pause. Now, I want to say again, clearly to my friends who are as concerned as I am about the environment, that I am not talking against wind power. I'm talking in favor of sensibly evaluating the issues and using the leverage that we have to the maximum to get the best we can get out of this plan. And to me, just stepping back from the complexity of how the agreements work together, we still should get more information on the real plans, not plans described like we'll use best efforts, we'll do whatever's necessary. I'm talking about actual plans. And we should allow the process to continue before we give away that leverage because it will enable us to have much greater impact with the ongoing review, and we can better protect the interests that we were elected to protect. So this is not an anti-wind power statement. It's a statement about how to sensibly negotiate, and it comports with some statements that I know from a very famous legal expert whose name is Yogi Berra, who once said, "It ain't over till it's over." And it's time to think about that. This review is not over, and the negotiation is not over until it's over. And we should be waiting on this to make sure that we stay a player to all the next steps, and that we're fully informed with real plans on the steps that we've outlined in the agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. You said a lot there, and apparently at this point you still have a number of questions. And I will say that I don't recall hearing those questions raised by you prior to today. So I'm kind of surprised and a little disappointed that you didn't engage more earlier on in the process when we were busy negotiating all of these points. I think it's important to also understand, I mean, you've said that NYSERDA says you shouldn't build a wind farm at less than 400 megawatts. And in fact, NYSERDA, from my understanding and speaking to the director, that they support this wind farm as proposed. It's important to understand that this is, New York's first offshore wind farm. And as such, the scale of it is less than what future wind farms will be, just as a matter of the way things develop, whether it's, the flat screen TV, which started very small and very expensive. And over time, economies of scale, research and development, and as the industry blossoms and grows, that you see those changes take place. We've seen, even in this project, it's been going on so long that advances in technology have caused the output of this from the same 15 turbines to go from 90 to 132 megawatts, just based on the size of the turbines that now can be sited. We expect this industry will continue to develop, that we will learn more as we go along. We don't have the luxury of waiting another several years to decide if we're going to, in fact, address the climate crisis. And that being said, we have worked hard to make sure that environmental impacts that you enumerated, are going to be followed. There are, as I said earlier, over 150 different instances within the document where the developer has to comply with mitigation and environmental issues. And as these plans do develop over time, and you mentioned BOEM, that's an ongoing process of review. The town is an involved agency in that, and we intend to, comment on the DEIS, which is currently open for comments. I share your concerns about Cox's Ledge. I think it's important to note that Cox's Ledge is a name on a map. It encompasses a rather large area of habitat, and that the habitat is quite varied within what is called Cox's Ledge. Some areas have very high productivity, others have very low, and there's sections in between that there's a grading of that. And I think it's really important because BOEM is the one, not the PSC, not New York State. BOEM is the one that has direct influence over what happens at Cox's Ledge. And we're only now getting to the point in development where that's being reviewed. But I do believe that it's important to stay engaged, to submit our comments. And in terms of leverage, I can take your point to that, Jeff, but I do think that at a certain point, if we don't continue moving forward by having a conditional agreement, that this project will probably just fail. And I think that would be a failure on our part to fulfill our duties and responsibilities to our 100% renewable energy goal, to protecting our environment, because I think that the impacts from not making this transition are far greater than the short-term impacts. I understand that there will be disruption by burying this cable within Wayne-Scott. We understand that. I think, making a commitment to the inhabitants of Wayne-Scott to have direct benefits as a result, because they are bearing, the burden of actually having the transport cable located in their community. The end result is going to be that there are going to be manhole covers in some of the streets. That's going to be the end result for Wayne-Scott long term. The other end result for Wayne-Scott is that there will be the benefit of clean renewable energy coming to our communities and offsetting the use of fossil fuel. And I think at this point we need to move forward. So those are my comments. I appreciate yours very much. And anybody else have anything to say?
Well, I want to say that I know Jeff was saying that, a lot of leverage, we would have leverage if we don't sign the documents, but I disagree completely with that statement. I feel that we will have leverage, and we'll have direct leverage over this, the easements, if we do sign the documents. And that's what is the beauty of a lot of what was the long-term effect of draft after draft after draft of these easements as we moved forward, and looking at what we needed to have in order to have local control over what was going on. So I disagree with that statement. I think these easements give the town of East Hampton a lot of power.
Thank you, Sylvia. Anybody else have a comment at this point?
I just want to say quickly that I'm not suggesting, that we inordinately delay the process. I'm suggesting that we continue to participate in the process, and I'm not suggesting that we toss out what we've negotiated. I'm just saying that we hold them, for example, until BOEM is further along in evaluating what's going on in Cox's Ledge, because in that context, we have a lot of influence over the applicant, very little influence over the agency. So if we just wait while the review is going on, we're in a position where we can watch and see what they do. And if we don't like something, easily reach out to Deepwater and say, hey, we need a better plan over here. And that's why I say we have more leverage. And finally, only one comment, and I won't belabor this, I promise you. I'm not saying throw out the project because it's not 400 megawatts. I'm just saying that that's a reality. It's something to consider. I understand that this is the first project, but just as a matter of common sense negotiating, we have more leverage with the applicant before we sign. Once we sign, they can do whatever they want.
That's just not fair to say out loud, because that's not what's happening, and that's not what's happening.
Sure it is.
It is not. We are given.
Hold on, time out.
We are given a great deal of power by signing these easements, and including the fact that we can pull out of it at any time, which would stop the project.
They can pull out of it at any time.
If I could just add one comment about it,
yeah.
And that is that I think it's a pretty cynical view to think that the agencies within the government, Fish and Wildlife, and every other environmental aspect of our government is not going to do the right job here. And I think our constant involvement, lobbying for doing the right thing here, only adds to what I think the agency voices will add. They're filled with dedicated scientists and environmentalists, and I think just to say that you don't trust that process, I have concerns about it.
Once again, I didn't say that.
Well,
I didn't say that.
You basically say that we don't have any leverage with BOEM, and it's a big old agency, bureaucratic agency, and they won't listen to us. And I think that's a cynical view of how this whole process works. And in a democracy, that the public comments do matter, and they matter to all of us here on this board. And we have patiently listened and considered them for 4.5 years. And, I think at this point, I am very comfortable with understanding the impacts directly to my community, whether they're on land or at sea. And as far as the on sea portion, we have more engagement and work to do. But as far as the land to sea transition portion, the landward portion, I'm confident that we have fully vetted, researched, and addressed this. And, that's why I'm comfortable to move forward and have these agreements in place, which are, by the way, conditioned upon the successful completion of those other processes, both the PSC and BOA. So I think to say, again, that somehow those processes don't result in a legitimate result is pretty cynical.
I'm not saying that. This is what you do with me, Peter. You rephrase my comments and you mischaracterize them in a sort of derogatory way. It's in every environmental review, there are disputes over the facts and disputes on how to go forward. I'm just saying that we're in a better position to exert some leverage before we've signed the agreement. If those
We've heard you loud and clear on that. We've heard you loud and clear on that for some time. And again, I appreciate your comments.
And I've made those comments diligently throughout this process. I might remind you, Peter.
You don't need to remind
I'm a
me
little tired
because I have
of the comment about not being engaged.
You chose to read off a litany of questions that you still have, which you hadn't brought prior to today. So that, I don't know if that's lack of engagement or are you just waiting to drop the bomb?
It's two issues that I raised about the damage deposit and PFOs, because they're legitimate and it's never too late to talk about the facts.
You rattled off, I think, 20 different plans. So in any case, I think we're fully aware of your position. I think we've heard from some of the other board members. Does anybody else have any further comment?
Let me just ask you, we've got John Wagner and Eli Elabat on the call. So why don't we ask them to address, with Jeff saying that we're losing leverage if we sign these conditional agreements, let's hear from our outside counsel to that point.
Do we have counsel want to address that issue?
Yes, it's John Wagner. These are our new questions, and I think we would all like to take another look at them. But I can just say, while we've been sitting here looking at the first issue that Mr. Bragman raised regarding the decommissioning bond, as he called it, no further liability, there is a bond that pertains to restoration post-construction, which is referenced in the easement language itself, not in the schedule, but in the actual easement language. I believe that's the bond that Mr. Bragman is referring to. And there is a clause in there regarding the grantee's liability after the bond is called. I can only tell you that the amount of that bond was discussed vigorously. We actually went out to the town highway department to determine, in a worst case scenario, what if they failed to restore the property after they did the construction. In other words, what restoration is they repair whatever changes they've made to the roads as part of installing the cable. So that means they did trenching, and eventually they have to fill in all the trenches, and they have to restore the pavement to what it was before, and any vegetation that may have been disturbed. That's all part of what we call restoration. It's not decommissioning. Decommissioning is a separate concept that occurs at the very end of the life of the project, not at the end of construction, but at the end when the project finally is done and is ready for actual removal from the scene. So the language that we're referring to there has to do with restoration, and the $1,500,000 was a very conservative amount that was obtained to figure out a worst case scenario where basically the entire trench was left unfilled. What would it cost for the town to remediate that? So that amount is meant to cover, a very extreme situation where the developer puts in the cable and does really basically nothing to put it back to what it was before. So that on that issue, I have a definitive answer. As far as the PFAS, I have to take a look at that language that Mr. Bragman mentioned about solely to see how it fits into the context. I will take a look at that. But, the idea just in general, PFAS obviously has been a seminal issue that's been considered throughout this negotiation process, to the point where when we crafted the easement and Schedule B to the easement, we included provisions in the Schedule B that are even more restrictive than what have been considered as part of the certificate conditions for the Article 7 process. I mean, we are requiring them, just to give you a summary of what all the legalese means, we're requiring them to ascertain the presence of groundwater beneath all the work that they'll be doing, how deep it is. The idea is to determine whether their trenching operation has any possibility of coming in contact with the underlying groundwater. And if so, determining what that groundwater consists of. Is there contamination in the groundwater? And if so, it must be remediated. And also we have very detailed provisions about dewatering operations to make sure that the dewatering, which involves pumping of groundwater out of the trench that they'll be working in, we want to ensure that that dewatering operation does not have any adverse effects on neighboring wells. So we have a very strict and detailed protocol for them to follow to make sure that that wells are not being affected, and if they are, that they will be remediated. So I mean, I think the document speaks for itself. You want to take a look at all of that, but I can. One other comment I would make is with respect to there were a whole bunch of plans that Mr. Bragman mentioned. I think what he's referring to are plans that will ultimately be included in the environmental management and construction plan. We call it the EM and CP. That's a document that is prepared as a byproduct of the Article 7 process. It's normally finalized after the certificate has been issued by the Public Service Commission. And it's probably the equivalent of building plans for a major project. Before you get a building permit, you have to have all these incredible engineering details worked out in exhausting detail. That is part of the process. It typically comes later. Knowing that, what we tried to achieve with the easement, I think we have achieved it, is we have provided in our easement documents that whatever those plans are, whatever they turn out to be eventually, they must include certain minimum things. And we laid them out. I think somebody said earlier, all the shalls that we have affirmative commitments by the developer to ensure that those plans include the things that we have specified based upon everything we've been talking about over the last 3 years with our experts and with other interested parties in this application, including the DEC, for example, which is very much involved in all of the wetland and groundwater contamination issues. We wanted to ensure that whatever plan they come up with, it has to include these particular items. And furthermore, we have commitments that they will comply with those plans. The reason why we did that is that we want this town to be empowered to be able to enforce these provisions, not rely upon another governmental agency, whether it's BOEM or the PSC, to enforce them. We wanted the town to be able to be the police person on these conditions. And if anything is violated, that the town has affirmative rights going forward to ensure that these commitments are honored. And the easement is structured such that if these conditions are not followed, that the easement itself will terminate. We may identify that they are not following a particular item that they are obligated to do under the easement. If so, the easement is structured that they have a cure period to fix it. We give them a period to fix what they're doing wrong. If they do not cure it, the easement itself will terminate. Their legal rights to maintain their cable in the town of East Hampton are forfeited. And that's a pretty big stick that is part of these agreements. And it will always be there for the life of the project because they are obligated to comply with these requirements throughout. So that's my general comment on it. There's a lot of different plans, and Mr. Bregman's correct. There are these plans that will come down in the future. What we wanted to do at this point is to make sure that they're going to contain the minimum requirements that serve the people of the town of East Hampton, and that we have a positive enforcement mechanism to make sure that those plans do have those requirements at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So if there aren't any further comments, I would like to move on now to the next part of our work session today, which is a discussion of UR road abandonments, a potential moratorium. And John Jilnicki, do you have, you want to give us a review of the discussion?
Yeah, just briefly, you'll see we'll have for consideration either this coming meeting or I'm not sure if the environmental's finished, but upcoming meeting will have a notice of a hearing to eliminate eligibility for at least one road within a map for, from future abandonment for purposes of maintaining a pedestrian trail as well as a wildlife corridor within one of these maps. And in talking to the planning department, I think that it might be time for a re-examination of all of the urban renewal maps to see if there are any other areas that we currently list as being eligible for abandonment, whether we want to maintain that as it shows or amend the maps to perhaps maintain more corridors for both pedestrians and wildlife, or even perhaps for other purposes. So I thought, this study was adopted in 1976, I believe, and it's been amended periodically piecemeal over the years. But it might be a good idea at this point to really take a hard look at the UR map as a whole and see what kind of changes we might want to make as to the availability of these roads that don't have to be opened for abandonment and absorption into adjoining properties, or perhaps used for some other purposes. We can't go back and undo the abandonments that have been done already, but there's still a significant amount of areas that have not been abandoned, and we do have the right to amend the maps in the interim. So I wanted to get the town board's feeling as to whether you think that's a good idea.
So John, I think, at least from my standpoint, I think it would be a good idea to institute a moratorium while we research the issue. A lot of changes have occurred since 1976. Yes. And the way UR maps develop over time could actually mean that some of those roads that were held out as potentially being used are in fact paper roads that have no real purpose at this point, and there might be a greater public purpose. And I think we know in some instances there is, and until we get a handle on that, I would agree that we should entertain this. Okay. And move forward.
In some instances too, we've actually acquired, and we didn't have when these maps were created, but we've acquired lands that are adjacent to some of these unopened roads. So they could be useful for access to our own properties.
So John, so folks understand, yeah, I was just gonna say, so John, so folks understand what the process is, who would be involved in it, and what's the time frame that you're looking at for a moratorium?
I'm thinking 6-month period, I think would be a reasonable period of time to be able to look at them all and get conclusions out of that review as to what needs to be changed, if anything. So I'm thinking about a 6-month period, hopefully not needing a further extension, because I think that's enough time to go. There's not that many maps to go through. And I think the planning department's very interested in getting into this and taking a look. So I think that's adequate. I could have the next meeting or two, we could have the notice of hearing, have the hearing I guess, a couple of weeks after that notice and adopt the moratorium if the board's inclined to do that.
I'm supportive of this measure. Primarily, I think, as Peter mentioned before, a lot has changed, and a lot of these parcels might have benefits to the community right now that we don't recognize until we actually research them all as a whole. If there's connectivity between green infrastructure, trails, or such, I think we should look at it right now, so we get a handle on it close to 44 years later.
A long time.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I support it. I think it's a good idea to take a look and see if we should change it. 44 years is a long time. I didn't realize that. I remember it being in existence when I first worked for the town back in the mid-1980s. But it'd be good to hear from the planning department and kind of get a macro view on what's going on, where we might improve our use in ways that benefit the larger town.
Yeah, this request came originally from the planning department, so I think it's prudent for us to move forward with a moratorium at this time.
Okay, so I think we're unanimous in that.
Great.
John, so if you'll prepare a resolution.
Yep, that would be great. Thank you. I'll do that.
Yeah. And that brings us up to the CPF 2021 Management and Stewardship Plan. And do we have Scott Wilson on with us today?
We do not have him on.
I don't think we do, actually.
I'll make the call.
Oh, okay.
So that being said, since we have just a moment, Michael, do you have any callers on the line?
We do.
For public comment?
We do. I will unmute the caller. Last 4 digits 0299 right now.
Good morning. This is Carolyn Logan Gluck calling.
Morning, Carolyn.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm sorry that the agenda has moved on, and with your permission, I'd like to circle back to an item that was on the agenda previously.
Please do. Yeah, anything you want to comment on the fair game?
Thank you so much. There was a conversation earlier about the South Fork Wind Farm, and I wanted to make some comments and ask 2 questions if possible. It seems to me that much of the time during conversations, a proper distinction isn't made between the South Fork Wind Farm project as a whole and then the easement, the draft easement agreement between the town and the developer that you made public in mid-December last year. And I'd like to really confine this conversation to the easement, to the draft easement agreement. I tried to listen as closely as I could to your opening remarks. And if I heard properly, this is what I heard. You believe we are at a point where we should move forward. And I take that to mean that you believe that that the town board is at a point where it should go ahead and sign the easement agreement and also the host community agreement. You mentioned that the majority of the callers who called into the work session last Tuesday were in support of the project. I heard the same thing too, but I would like to point out that many of those callers were calling in support of the project as a whole, and only a fraction of those were calling in to support the signing of the agreement. I would also like to point out the majority of those callers, to my knowledge, do not live in Waynescott. Previous to that comment, you said that if people had concerns, they should read the documents. I can tell you for a fact there are quite a few people who live in Waynescott that have taken the time to read the documents because they have concerns, and that reading the documents has caused them concern. And that's why both the Waynescott CAC and individual members of the Waynescott community have both written to the town board and also called in to town board meetings. They have concerns. It could be that these are the same concerns that you've been hearing. You said that you didn't hear anything new and that all aspects of the easement agreement are within the law. I'm not a lawyer. That's very possibly true, but that doesn't negate the fact that there are people in the community who have read the documents who still have concerns. They raised them at the CAC meeting 9 days ago, and Sylvia was fantastic. Our liaison, Sylvia Overby, was fantastic in answering as many of them as she could, but she could not answer all of them. So there are questions that remain unanswered. You say that outside engineers and consultants have been involved, but apart from the legal representation, and you mentioned John Wagner and Eli Elabot, I don't know the names of any engineers who you have engaged who might be able to answer some of the questions that have been raised. So what makes me a little bit sad is that the reason why I didn't call at the beginning of the meeting was because I was thinking that you were going to take this time to answer some of the questions that have been raised both in the letter from the CAC and in other letters that have been written, one of which I was copied on. And I didn't see that happen, which is why I'm calling now with one thought and two questions. When we participated with you in the preparation and completion of the Hamlet studies, from where I stood, it seemed that there was a wonderful dialogue that took place between the town board and members of the community here in Wainscott and in all of the other hamlets where the Hamlet studies were being conducted. We took the time, the Wainscott CAC took the time to gather information from the community, to discuss the issues amongst themselves, to write to you on several occasions. And those letters, the points brought up in those letters and the question raised were addressed by those who you had hired to conduct the Hamlet study, and they became part of the record. And there's a wonderful little chart at the very end of the Wainscott Hamlet study section that details not just those raised by the CAC, but by other members of the community. And it was a wonderfully reassuring aspect to the whole process that I think that helped people feel that they were engaged, helped people feel that their concerns were being not simply listened to, but acted on and heard and incorporated. And I don't think that that's what's going on with this discussion about the wind farm easement agreement. It seems that every time we raise questions, they just go into a dark hole. And the rationale that I've heard from you on more than one occasion is that you don't have the luxury of waiting. And you feel, and so I understand that to mean that you feel that this easement agreement needs to be signed immediately so that the wheels of progress don't hit any snags or hit any delays. And I remember at one point in time, you mentioned delays in the opening of Wainscott Green by way of comparison, which I question how parallel that is. I appreciate that East Hampton Town doesn't have the luxury of waiting for the wind farm project as a whole to be complete. But I wonder, and this is my first question, how much delay would there be if the easement that your lawyers, you, the town board, and your lawyers have drawn up were signed after completion of the Article 7 process? How much delay would there be to the project in months, weeks, years? And two, as with the Hamlet studies, would you consider, could you please respond to the questions that you've received, and could you respond to those questions in writing so that they can be shared amongst all members of the community? Thank you. Those are my two questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. With the discussion of questions, the questions brought by the CACs are generally funneled through the liaisons, and the liaisons then, would convey that information back. I'm sure that Sylvia will be able to circulate, a list of answers to the questions that have been presented by the CAC. I would certainly expect that at a minimum. Again, we've received a number of comments and questions from a number of individuals, and I think our primary objective here was to hear from the public. Are there any issues or questions that come up that we haven't already considered and addressed? And at this point, I don't think there are, but to your point, I think it's important for us to convey to the public the responses of how these different questions have been addressed within the agreements. Again, we're confident that they all are. It does take some time to be able to directly answer those questions back to the public, I think, given that we are in fact still in a worldwide pandemic, and the town board's focus is not just on this particular topic, but we deal on a daily basis with trying to develop a vaccination center here within the town that will be able to provide high capacity once vaccine is available. That is job number one, in my opinion, right now, the health and safety of our community. And also, we've been working on expanding testing. We have now COVID testing here at Town Hall, and we're looking to expand that out to Montauk too, potentially in the next week. So, I apologize if you haven't gotten a written response yet. I believe your next meeting is coming up next month. Certainly by then, you will certainly have the opportunity to have those questions answered, if not before. But I do think that's important. In terms of, people have said, what's the rush? Again, I don't think there's any rush. This is we're just at a point now where, we feel confident that we can move forward with this portion of the project. And I don't think that that means in any way that we're done with the project, because it is a big project and there are offshore portions which are still being reviewed, and we have an opportunity as an involved agency to engage, and we should. But I think in looking at the land portion of the project, that we have looked at this every which way, and I'm confident that with the help of our outside counsel and engineers, we hired sound engineers to review plans and to advise us on how to mitigate sound as part of the construction. We've had Fanning, Phillips, and Molinar, they're hydrologists and water quality, environmental firm and engineering firm. We've engaged them, as well as two outside law firms represented here today by Eli Elbott and John Wagner. We've also worked directly with the trustees to address many of these issues. And their outside counsel, Dan Spitzer and Milla Buckner. So, again, at this point, I think we feel like we've answered the questions to the satisfaction of the board in terms of decision-making process. But, further education and communication between the board and the community is necessary and will be ongoing. I hear from residents within Wainscott, even after nearly 4.5 years, that are only just finding out about the project. And elsewhere in town, I had someone email me concerned about being irradiated by the transport cable. So there's a lot of information out there and a lot of misinformation. And, I think it's incumbent upon us to try to do the best job we can communicating, what's in the agreement and what issues that are brought up that we have addressed and how we've addressed them. You've heard some of that today with outside counsel. I think that will be an ongoing effort.
I have a question. I'm not clear about what you just said, although you said a lot.
Okay.
Carolyn, I think, was saying, that there were specific questions that were out there, and that she had hoped that she would get a response like the way we saw in the Hamlet study reports, where they have the question and the answer, and we'd have some discussion on that. And then you said, well, Sylvia is responsible for going back to the CAC, which I understand, but that omits the fact that the public watching this meeting is probably interested in those answers as well. So I think what she asked, I think, was, are we going to see that? And I was wondering that myself.
Oh, I'm happy to have that posted on social media and the website, Jeff. But she specifically asked about Wayne Scott CAC's letter, and I think that my response was focused on that.
So let me just, as the liaison, so there were questions. Some of those have been, or all of them that I had in my notes were submitted, and I just need to, talk to our council just to make sure that those are answered correctly, and that the information that, I can give to the CAC at the next meeting or just before the next meeting.
Well, shouldn't that be part of the public record of our work session as well?
I don't know. Is the WCAC part of the work session? If it is, and there were 65 people on the call, so I'm assuming that they will be forwarded to some of the people that were not members of the CAC that were asking the questions.
And on that, to that point, we did request that the CAC, since they have a sign up for their meetings, that they share those email addresses with us, with those who participated, so we'd have an opportunity to directly engage and respond to everyone who participated in that meeting. So, that would be helpful too, Carolyn, if you're still listening, to have those emails forwarded so that we can, in fact, engage and circulate those answers to everyone who was on that call.
Well, I think my point is it seems like they put it in the public record of this work session, and we're expecting a response. And I think the public is interested, the wider public as well. I think it should be part of the work session.
Well, I did express that we would make that available to the public. And
was there an option of just crafting some of those answers and putting them on our website then? So that,
it's really like FAQs, if you will, frequently asked questions, because at this point, these questions have come up a number of times. And, I know that some other organizations, both CCOM and New York League of Conservation Voters, have held webinars, informational webinars as well. I did introductory statements to the New York League of Conservation Voters webinar. I think that was very helpful for the public to understand what's taking place and how the construction would be performed. And we have that information up on the town's website, the link to that. I think that's highly informative. And with regard to the specific questions that we received via, a letter from the CAC, we'll, again, respond to those, and we can make all those comments public on a FAQ, link on the website.
John, would that work, John?
Oh, sure, Carolyn. Yeah.
Thank you for responding. You said that the questions that we've raised have come up a number of times. I want to just go back to where I started, which is there's a difference between the project as a whole and the easement agreement. And I'm trying to keep this conversation about the easement agreement. And there were specific aspects to that agreement that caused concern. And that's what our letter was addressing mainly. And there was also a letter from Citizens for the Preservation of Wayne Scott. I don't represent them, except to the extent that many of the people who belong to that organization do live in Wayne Scott. So perhaps as chair, I can say that people in Wayne Scott are interested in the answers to the question raised in that letter as well as questions raised at the town board meeting. So I'm not just simply asking for answers to questions that were outlined in our letter. There have been many great questions asked, and I think people who are interested in the wind farm are interested both in the questions and in the answers. That's what, I was a school teacher. That's how people learn, by listening to the questions their classmates ask and problem solving together. And I wish this process could be more like that. My first question to you was, how much delay would there be if the easement agreement that you've drafted were signed after completion of the Article 7 process?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I don't know if the project would move forward.
Sure it would. The process is the process. Would move forward in the process. The failure to have a signed agreement has not impeded this process. This is a debate we had 3 years ago when I first started on this, and they claimed that they needed a signed easement agreement in order to move
saying
forward.
I can't predict.
Let me just finish, Peter, please. I'll be very quick.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's an issue that first came up about 3 years ago when Deepwater claimed that they needed a signed easement, or they just couldn't move forward. And the answer was no, you don't need it. So I don't see it as delaying anything. It just, you delay signing the papers, that's all.
Carolyn, you have Jeff's answer. I honestly don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure if it would delay or not. I really have no way of knowing that.
Well, that's
and if
what
so,
I've
how
heard
long?
you say, is sign the agreement so that the easement agreement, so that the project won't be delayed. But this doesn't make sense to me, what you're saying. I understand you want the wind farm to be built as quickly as possible, but if you can't say that you know what the delay is going to be if the easement is signed after the Article 7, then why would you be signing it now?
Again, Article 7, this easement is conditioned upon a successful Article 7. So frankly, I don't see a difference whether we sign it now or we sign it afterward. I know Mr. Bragman has stated, that he has a different opinion, but I don't.
Because with all due respect, the questions in these letters that I've referred to are questions about the easement agreement, not the South Fork Wind Farm as a project as a whole. They're about the easement agreement.
I understand that. I've addressed it. I've told you that we'll get you answers to the letter. And at this point, I want to move on with the meeting, as the public portion was in the beginning of the meeting. And I will take comments at the end of the work session if somebody else is called in, but I would like to continue on with our business. But I appreciate you calling in.
I thank you for your time and for the time of the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe and be well. So at this point, we have Mr. Wilson. Scott Wilson's on the call now. And Scott, if you want to give us an introduction to the CPF 2021 Management and Stewardship Plan.
Sure, we've done this several times before, so just a few words on what we're talking about. The creation of a management and stewardship plan is a requirement of Town Law 64E-6, which states in part, each town board may also adopt a management and stewardship plan for interests or rights of real property acquired pursuant to this section. No monies from the fund shall be expended for management and stewardship except as provided in said plan. Now, we all know that all properties need some form of stewardship, be it posting of signs, cleaning up debris, reconciling encroachments, and therefore each year we update and submit a new plan. For 2021, we have a stewardship budget of $477,000, which represents less than 2% of our revenue. We could otherwise encumber 10%. We're encumbering less than 2% of that. We have acquired interest and rights in real property for 454 parcels, with 11 more in contract, representing in total some 2,250 acres. Now, we accomplish the vast majority of our stewardship work in-house. We create a baseline document for each acquired property, which documents the parcel as it exists at the time of acquisition. We help create management plans as necessary, and we regularly monitor all CPF properties every year for encroachments, dumping, or other issues. Now, beyond in-house management, the proposed plan discusses any known projects along with associated expenses. We have 7 projects on this list for 2021. Demolition of structures at the Brooks and Park property on Neck Path, demolition of structures at the Avalon property at 136 Second House Road, demolition of structures at Phillips property, 395 Panago Road, demolition of structures at the Downs property at 958 Fireplace Road, the creation of a multi-user trail at the Trunzo property, 138-148 Buckskill Road, removal of bamboo and restoration at the Maloney property, 888 Fireplace Road, and number 7, wetland restoration and stormwater abatement at 81 Ocean Avenue in the village. Unfortunately, at this time, we have not gone out for requests for proposal for these projects, so I don't have an associated set of expenditures for that group. After we do those requests for proposals, that information will be made available. I simply just don't have it at this time. With regard to this plan, the responsibility of our department was to create a document that will guide us in our efforts towards appropriate management and stewardship goals and objectives, assist in prioritizing projects, and control related expenditures. This lends transparency to the plan, giving the general public the opportunity to participate in the discussions surrounding proposed expenditures. The draft plan can be found on the town's website and in the town clerk's office. Does the board have any specific questions regarding the plan?
I don't, Scott. Other board members?
Don't.
I don't. Thank you very much for laying it out.
Can I make a quick request then? This is somewhat timely, and things going to public hearing and getting resolutions adopted and proceeding with these projects takes a little bit of extra time now. Is it too late to submit an SPH for Thursday? Or would you prefer that I wait to the first week in Feb?
No, I think you could do that if the board agrees. Carol, do you have any comment on that?
Carol's muted.
Muted.
Fine with me, as long as you go in and approve them.
I would support the resolution, Scott, and I think is the best thing we can do is get it to the public to hear from the public's comments on the plan.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Will
Great.
do.
Thank you very much, Scott. Any other questions for Scott? Okay, thanks again.
All right.
Be well. So at this point, we're up to liaison reports. Reports, Kathy?
I do. So our new walk-in freezer at Human Services has arrived, and it's going to be a game changer for the staff in the senior nutrition program when it comes to preparing meals for delivery. And as you know, we're delivering 5 frozen meals each week to 275 seniors. Obviously the testing site at Town Hall has been up and running for the last couple of weeks, and we've got a limited number of scholarships available for free COVID-19 testing. And we ask that you call Human Services at 631-329-6939. They have a short intake form to see if you qualify for a free rapid response test. The Disabilities Advisory Board met last Friday, and what came out of it is that we're finding that folks in the community are turning to their pharmacists to inquire about COVID testing, and some of our pharmacists don't live here in town. So our office is reaching out to the pharmacists in the community to let them know about the availability of testing. A few weeks back, we had heard from Kate Muse at the Neopolitical Cowgirls, and they are looking to place a little free food pantry and wanted to know if the town wanted to be a partner in that. A little free food pantry is a place where people can give or take for free canned goods and other non-perishables as needed. And they're running a January girls workshop, and they were going to be establishing and maintaining, and maintaining means they're going to be visiting it twice a day to make sure everything is working. there, and they've asked if there was a potential site, and we came up with the senior center located at 128 Springs Fireplace Road. We thought it was centrally located and could be a good location for this little free food pantry. It's really a modest little pantry. I think it's 3 shelves. And what I was going to do is offer a resolution on Thursday to have the board authorize the placement, and the exact location over there at the senior center would be at the discretion of the Director of Human Services, Diane Patrizio. Right now, we're just working out the insurance, but it's, you know, it's an exciting opportunity for, been very popular in other communities. It's, in some cases, it's taken the place of those little free libraries that people had been putting up in front of their homes and whatnot. So I was going to offer that resolution on Thursday. The police reform and reinvention survey, we're so close. I believe it's going out today to get the final blessing of the larger committee. So that'll be launching. Stay tuned for that. Spring CAC, we've got a new meeting schedule. We now meet in 2021. We'll be meeting the 4th Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m., an hour earlier. And our first meeting is Tuesday, January 26th. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, I'm sure folks have read about it, but tonight there's at 5:30, there's going to be a memorial to honor and remember the over 400,000 lives that have been lost to COVID-19. A ceremony is taking place at the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool in Washington, D.C., with cities and towns across the country invited to join in by illuminating buildings and ringing church bells at 5:30 in a national moment of unity and remembrance. And those of us at home can light a candle in our window to honor and remember those we have lost. And that's my report for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. David?
Yes, thank you. Just give me one moment. The Nature Preserve Committee met last week via Zoom, and there's a lot of great topics coming up right now. A lot of this information is being generated from months of past work, but also in a tight timeline right now that some of you heard actually just in the management and stewardship plan, try to move forward potentially for the summertime. Let me just actually get it on the maintenance report right now. As Scott had mentioned, the Avalon property on Fort Pond has been recently purchased, and we have to go out to bid for the demolition of those structures that are on the building. Structures that are on the property, but we would have to do so. But we're preparing and getting all the permits ready for it from the DEC and other entities right now. That is also very similar to the other restoration project that we're doing on the AR property, 81 Ocean Avenue, jointly working with the village on that, which will be actually having a public hearing, I believe, very shortly. We're still doing inspections. Land management is still doing inspections of private property for southern pine beetles. So please let land management know if you have any concerns. You can contact them at 324-4141. Land management has recently also been putting up this past month seasonal sign-up sheets at the access points for the January firearms season for townwide hunting properties. If you have any other questions, please go to the clerk's website. They'll let you know what the necessities are for that, or the DEC's website then too. I don't know if I mentioned this one already, but recently the board assisted and improved actually funding for survey work at the Bennett Cemetery, which is on Northwest Road. That cemetery has now been surveyed, it's staked, and actually a trail pathway has been cleared there. I apologize if I mentioned already. Where that also leads me into a little bit of discussion with the Montauk CAC, and then also with the town, is I will be joining a webinar with the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, in which myself, in discussions with Catherine Kern over the past couple months, they've become very interested in our colonial cemeteries, and is putting out a small amount of grant funding potentially available to townships for conservation of our colonial cemeteries. So that grant will be a couple months out, but the webinar, myself and Laura, we are going to actually look at that pretty much based on the actions that this town board has taken for our township and these colonial cemeteries, a very large benefactor of institutional funding has now opened the doors, and pretty much because of everyone here on this board. So I thank you very much. We're all opening eyes up to a lot of other individuals about that part of our lovely Long Island history. Kiosk. We're replacing a lot of the paper maps with plastic maps at our kiosk. That brings me up to another portion of the discussion here that we had at the Nature Preserve Committee, in which I know I brought this up last month, but we're looking at a couple of our trail ends right now. Our trail ends are being used a lot right now in our township, all around, anywhere from Northwest, the walking dunes, the Potomac Path out to Montauk. And we're targeting 3 trail ends to potentially do some to put newer kiosks there, do some trail maintenance that make them very similar to our other locations, in which we can direct people in our township to the appropriate trails, history, but make sure they're within the character of the areas. I'm just going to quickly screen share something. 3 of these locations that we discussed right now. One would be in the Grassy Hollow Nature Preserve. This is located up off Northwest Road by the Scoy Schoolhouse. Some of the locations you can see people are just pulling off to the side. And again, there's also a vernal pond there. So we might want to be looking into some guard railings or appropriate, work there. There's also our bicentennial markers in this location and a cemetery that we recently restored, excuse me. There's also the Montauk Recycling Center. It's used a lot for mountain bikers and hikers. You can see the old Wayland sign that we have there. We're looking at that location then too. We would have to do that with the coordination with the state because it's in the state right away. And then the last one is actually the Culloden Point Nature Preserve, which is a very large nature preserve. And it's got a lot of great topography and also environmental criteria to it. It's within the road right away or just past it of the county road on Edgemere. It's actually a location of one of the old dumps in Montauk. And again, it has one of our historical markers there. So these are locations that that the Nature Preserve Committee is going to start looking at, that we can potentially do some very inexpensive, small little work that actually will benefit a lot of the community when they first go into these trails. Moving from that, I was actually contacted also by 2 Eagle Scouts recently about doing Eagle Scout projects. One of these projects is actually very similar to the kiosk that an Eagle Scout most recently from Sag Harbor put up at Cedar Point Park, and it would be for the design of a kiosk, and a kiosk that would be put, in this case, potentially at the Van Scoy location that we just showed on Northwest. I'm getting the design from the individual right now, but part of the Eagle Scout project would be designing that, installing that, working with land management, other benefactors to build that. I'll get some more information to the board, but if there's willingness to do so, I could let the Eagle Scout know. Staying on Eagle Scout, even though it's outside the Nature Preserve Committee, another Eagle Scout project that I've been contacted about would be actually for a scout to actually, from the Montauk troop, to actually put dugouts out at the Montauk Lions Field, which is, I know, something that's been looked at for years, but the Scouts very interested in doing so with community input and also community leadership then too. I'm waiting on some designs of that, but it'd be very similar to the ones that were put down over here originally at Panago, and I believe those are donated by Mike Ruddy at that time and his work.
So David, as far as the Eagle Scouts, from my understanding, because I actually was on part of the committee that looked at Eagle Scout projects and approved them for the Troop 298 here in East Hampton, they have to come before the board, I believe, right, and make the presentation. I think that's part of their requirement, that they make the ask of us directly.
Well, that's so the ask came through land management initially, and I did not know that part about it, but we can make that happen then too. Yeah. So both of them then too. I think the kiosk project is got a tighter timeline than the one in Montauk, but I will reach out to both those individuals, to do a short presentation to the board for that then too.
That'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Continue on the maintenance report. the 5x5 soil test, we're still waiting for the final report back so we can get that management plan to the board for that location there too. I know we got it also an email just recently this morning. Nature Preserve Committee has been working with the trustees about potentially adding additional kayak rafts at Louse Point in a location that you'll see in that letter. There was great debate on that also at the Nature Preserve Committee, but the recommendations are coming to you and we can discuss that at a later time. We continue to discuss the Fresh Pond Grasslands Management Plan, which is an old mine site that CPF purchased maybe 10 years ago. The management plan was designed and a motion was accepted and the plans are moving forward. So please be ready to see that draft management plan to the board, in which we would have to put up for a public hearing very, very shortly. Another discussion that we had was about the Buckskill Meadows Preserve that we had. I know that's in the management and stewardship plan. And that preserve management plan, we actually had already approved recently, I think maybe in November of 2020. Seems like years ago now. And that plan is set for installing a multi-user path at that location. We're looking into that path and costs for that. For walking, ADA accessibility. And then also like to continue to develop a license agreement for the barn that's on that property to an outside entity that works within the purchase and the whereas clause there then too. So continue to look forward for that. I have one last thing to screen share for the Nature Preserve. I did mention this at the Montauk CAC last week. We have had some slumping. You can see in this photo down here on the Shadmore Preserve again. This is a separate area that we discussed last year. I believe it might have even been the year before that. It's going to take some board walking to come along here and bring it inside because there's some wetness that wet areas in these locations. You can see some of the aerial photos, how the water comes through here, slumps down, and really just starts to erode down this location. So it became a public safety hazard. We marked it off, and we're going to be waiting for some more information from land management about what we can potentially install there. So I alerted the CAC to that. We've taken care of the string fencing to make sure it's not a public safety issue. And we'll come to the board shortly again, but I just wanted to give you the heads up as soon as possible on that one. In aquaculture, great, amazing things in aquaculture this time of year right now. They're developing algae cultures. They're up and running. I know everyone's interested in that. That's pretty much the food. They're developing the food for the scallops and oysters right now. It is a true science to it, actually. It looks like you're in a true laboratory when you're out there. And they're brood stock conditioning right now. And they're getting ready for their first spawn, which would be, targeting on February 16th right now then too. So they're working hard already with living organisms. There's a set schedule that they have to do to be able to cultivate as many clams, oysters, and scallops that we do. And we know based on the scallop die-off that's very important. So I know John Dunn's working really hard on that. Let's see, lastly, I'll have on resolution for this Thursday. We've put up the transcript for the SoCIDE's parking restrictions. That's been up for multiple weeks now on the town's website. I would like to put that up for the town board for passing for this coming Thursday. I didn't know if anyone had any questions or concerns after we had the public hearing. But if you do, please let me know. If you'd be supportive of that, I would like to put that up for a vote this coming Thursday. Also, one thing you'll notice on Thursday too is another resolution upcoming. It might be going under Sylvia. You're going to see transfers of budgets within the sanitation department of nearly $260,000. It might even be a little bit more than that. I apologize if I'm off. Pretty much what that is showing is the increased amount of refuse that our recycling centers are taking in right now, and the cost of that right now. Compared to last year, that we're that much over, which shows that we're close to 900 tons into the season right now from our, from everyone's here. Everyone's cleaning out the garages, and it's costing a lot more money. So that might be a good presentation to have. Sylvia and I can talk about and bring to the board just to alert you some of these numbers that it's tough to quantify how many people are here. We can look at, the recycling center and the tonnage. Maybe we can look at the electrical usage that's out here. We can just see people on the street in the cars, but that's a number I don't want anyone to be shocked by, and that's why we're modifying those budgets on Thursday. And with that, that's my liaison report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Sylvia?
Thank you. I wanted to thank you again for letting me have that, read the statement from the Anti-Bias Task Force. They met last week, and we were able to put this statement together so that we could read it now. I think it's important that just before the inauguration and transfer of power to a new president, that we understand that we want to come together and not be divisive in any way. The Anti-Bias Task Force did their diversity show. It was recorded. It's been shown several times. It'll also be shown today at 6 p.m. on Channel 22. So please tune in for the diversity show. Anna Skrenta and Kevin Shabla were the hosts of that particular show. And Kevin is a high school student and was really, and so it is, and was brilliant in his presentation, as was Anna, and the questions that they asked. And their guests were Rabbi Josh Franklin and Reverend Leandra Lambert. So it was a lot of fun to see them interact. And we're doing another diversity show, either the 21st or the 25th. And the spotlight is going to be on our food pantries. And two other people are going to host, Louise Bergerson and Susan Wilmer, I think, are the hosts of that particular show. Future shows we'd like to do with seniors, talking about Meals on Wheels and RSVP to organizations that are in the town of our local organizations within our town, and spotlight our seniors and those particular organizations and what they do for our seniors. We're also updating our brochure, which hasn't been updated in many years. That's going to take a little bit of time as we update that. And we hope to come out with another statement that's sort of a statement of the year 2020, produced by the Anti-Bias Task Force, some of the issues that came up throughout the year, so that we can talk about those and produce those. The Community Housing Opportunity Fund Committee met, and thank Kathy Burt Gonzalez for also joining us. And we're looking at, Tom Rule told us that Fred Thiel is again introducing legislation for a 0.5% tax on home sales earmarked for affordable housing. So it was passed last year by both the legislature, by both houses of legislature, but was not signed by the government. And so we're trying to see, Fred is working on in making sure that any questions that came up from the governor's end are going to be addressed in this particular legislation. We also discussed moving forward with an affordable housing overlay on the Phillips property, which is at 400 Panago Road. It's a 300.
395.
Thank you.
395 Panago.
Okay, sorry, I had it. That property was purchased it's a 12-acre parcel, purchased 7 acres by East Hampton itself and 5 acres by the Community Preservation Fund. And so they are requesting that we move forward with that affordable housing overlay on the 7 acres.
I would support that.
Okay, good. And it's up to me to, you will get a letter from the Community Housing Opportunity Fund requesting that. And I'll also talk to Joanne Powell to start moving on that. And the questions came up as to, it's one piece of property. Do we need a subdivision as we move forward or not? So we'll, John, I'll be talking to you about that as well, how we move forward. Let's see. Katie Casey who's the director of the Housing Authority, talked to us about Gansett Meadow occupation. They now have their permanent CO. She also talked to us about the 3 Mile Harbor project, and it's moving forward as well to get some tax benefits from the state and letters that needed to be at least positive letters for this project to move forward from different entities. And the other discussion we had was the type of affordable housing that's needed in the town of East Hampton, whether it's ownership, rental, whether it's single ownership or condo ownership, what's best needed. And then a new category came up, new to East Hampton, but they are around the country and actually around the world, called co-housing. So we're going to look into some co-housing as well as to see if that works for part of our helping with our affordable housing. The Energy Sustainability Committee, the small group that also met, and we'd like to move forward with the what's known as leaf blower legislation, and to do a summary of the comments and changes that might be needed based on the public hearing. And hopefully we can do that in the first Tuesday, the first work session that we have in February. So if we can put that on a list. And they also talked about the stretch code, which is the building code that we had a presentation by NYSERDA. Put that on a work session probably later in the month. We need a few answers from NYSERDA itself as we integrate the stretch code, or how we would integrate the stretch code into our own building code. The Business Recovery Group met this past Wednesday, and I'll give you the numbers that were given to me by Robert Ross from the Southampton Hospital. As of last Wednesday, there were 38 COVID patients in Southampton Hospital, and 7 of them were in ICU. Stony Brook Hospital had 172 COVID patients, and 66 of those were in ICU. And Eastern Long Island Hospital had 7 COVID patients. We all recognize that there is an uptick in the number of COVID positive people in our community, and we want to make sure that people are aware of any testing sites that we have, and also the business community as a whole. And that meeting is willing to help through either volunteer people or funding in any way to help us get vaccines quickly to as many people as possible locally. So, and I want to thank them for all of their time, interest, and effort in making sure that our community is safe. And that is my report.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah. You have a liaison.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Housing Authority briefly, and it sort of follows up on what you just said, Sylvia. The issue that the Housing Authority wanted some help from us on was on a question involving payments in lieu of taxes called pilot agreements. And when we do affordable housing, typically an element of the plan is that the applicant or the agencies involved make these payments to the school district in lieu of paying taxes. And they're somewhat complicated to figure out, and they involve projections of the student populations that they anticipate may be living in the particular planned housing that they're being developed. And so Katie Casey did contact the town board. It was somewhat under a pressing deadline, asking us to, at first asking us to come up with a pilot agreement, or come up with a detailed pilot agreement. I've been working with Jim Ryan, who's our tax counsel, and John Jilnicki on pilot agreements for a number of months, because the issue came up maybe 8-9 months ago in front of the Housing Authority. And they're complicated agreements in terms of doing the math and anticipating, what the student population will be. And they're also somewhat complicated in getting them executed and who signs first and what the town's involvement is. But we were able to cut through some of the complexity. I talked to Jim Ryan about it, and a relatively simple letter was all they needed. So the town board did manage to get a letter to Georgia Green Ventures. Georgia Green Ventures is the joint venture partner with the East Hampton Housing Authority, essentially saying that we've we've supported and participated in other affordable housing projects in which pilot agreements were negotiated and that they had worked very well, that the estimates on students turned out to be true, and that we anticipated that the same would be true on this new housing plan that they're joint venturing on 3 Mile Harbor. So we got the job done in time for them, and I think that's a good thing. And also, the recent news reports from the Star are that the projections on the pilot agreement for Gansett Meadow have proved to be accurate, so that was reassuring. So we did what we had to do. It was a little last minute and it was a little frantic, but Jim Ryan worked on it. I think John Jolnicki was involved as well, and we got the job done. I wanted to bring...
Before you move on, can we just have a little discussion about that? Because your recounting of events is quite different than what came across my desk and what was offered. And I came in to work on Monday morning, and at 10 o'clock found out we had a 12 o'clock deadline to submit a letter in support of this funding proposal, which apparently had been circulated to you on November 25th. My office was not made aware ahead of time, and we made every effort to make sure that that letter went out in a timely way. But it wasn't, there's obviously some lack of communication that went on based on the correspondence that I received subsequent. So I'm glad it got done. The letter came from my office, and it meant dropping what we were doing at the time in order to get it done in a timely way.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware
that on the record.
I'm not aware that that notice was given as early as you're saying.
I'm reading an email I got from Katie Casey about the whole episode. So,
well, Katie Casey talked to me about an email she had sent too, and I searched for her emails and didn't find an earlier email like she was talking about. And the notice I got was fairly late in the game. And it wasn't the same day notice. It was a couple days before, and I had been in touch with Jim Ryan in plenty of time. And she didn't need what she was trying to get, and sort of, I think, jumped out of her lane a little bit by talking directly to our tax counsel, who represents the town board, doesn't represent the housing authority, which is a separate entity, and tasked him and Jeannie Nielsen to actually work out the pilot agreement, which would seem to be, I know that the assessor's office does get involved in it, but first of all, it's premature. The project hasn't even gotten started in front of the planning board. And secondly, they did not need that degree of detail. And
if you conveyed that earlier on, we wouldn't have had a time deadline. But in any case, I'm glad.
No, I disagree with that, and I take issue with that. I did not get that early notice. I got a fairly late notice of it, and she was, way into preparing the pilot agreement, which really makes no sense because all they wanted and needed was some general statement that we had worked before with the entity, and the pilot agreements had worked. I worked that out, not on the same day, with Jim Ryan, and communicated with Joanne Powell as soon as I could. So I take issue with that.
So where did the letter originate?
Well, I actually wasn't notified. This is an interesting thing because I picked up the issue from a letter that Joanne Powell sent around to the town board, and I had not gotten the letter from Katie Casey that prompted that. And that letter from Joanne Powell came earlier in the week. It wasn't months beforehand. So I was trying to track down what the source of that letter was. And I talked to Joanne Powell about it very briefly, figured out what was going on, contacted Jim Ryan, and realized pretty promptly that the degree of detail that they were going into and trying to draft the entire pilot agreement was way, way premature. So it was easily resolved. But I didn't get the letter the initial letter that started this went to Joanne Powell, and I think then went to you. I wasn't included in that, and I don't know why I wasn't. I wanted to shift over to just some general items that I've been sort of looking at from time to time. I pick up environmental cases or reports of environmental concerns that I think are relevant to our issues in East Hampton. And I saw one recently. It's a December article out of the Los Angeles Times, and it deals with scientists solving the mystery of a mass die-off of coho salmon out in Seattle, near Northern California and British Columbia, where they were restoring streams and waterways to generate coho salmon, and they were mysteriously having repetitive die-offs, and they couldn't figure out what was going on, and it was a process that lasted for easily, years. And what they finally realized was that it was a chemical, a component chemical from automobile tires, and that when the tires were either driven or were soaked in room temperature water, they gave off a number of their constituent chemicals, including this rather mysterious preservative called 6-PPD. And, the most disturbing part of the scientists, literally, this was a many-year project to try to figure it out, and they finally narrowed it down to this chemical. But what caught my eye was that they experimented by putting used tires at room temperature water for about 24 hours, and they determined that it was shedding these component parts, many of which were toxic. And you may ask, well, what the heck does a die-off of coho salmon in Seattle have to do with East Hampton? I raised the issue because in planning for our Little League fields over on Stephen Ann's Path, we're planning to put down artificial turf. And one of the major ingredients of an artificial turf surface is used tires. In fact, the product really was developed as a mechanism so that we wouldn't be landfilling used tires. So I bring this to your attention to show that this is not a benign substance. And I wanted to remind us all that the area where we're talking about putting this down is a water recharge overlay district, which means that drainage into the waterways is a concern there. And I think it suggests that we should be very cautious before we put down a massive amount of artificial turf. Also, artificial turf is a significant, tires waste are a significant contributor to the microplastic catastrophe that we see worldwide, where these tiny pieces of plastic that are barely visible are placed in locations where they can enter the ecosystem, and then they become ingested by animals and become part of the food chain. So it's not a benign material to be using. It's something that we should be cautious about, and I will circulate this article to you so that you can take a look at it yourself.
Well, if I could just jump in there, I'll actually circulate a letter to the board also that comes from our engineering firm's outside company for field turf. It says, to whom it may concern, we are aware of media reports around the potential presence of trace amounts of PFAS, chemicals in some artificial turf fields. In light of these reports, we have worked closely with our supplier of artificial turf filaments to verify that our products do not contain these chemicals. Our suppliers confirm that their products are free of PFAS, PFOs, and fluorine. And we care deeply about the safety of our surfaces and those who use them, and will continue to vigilantly monitor our products to ensure that they will remain free of these substances. So
those are different substances.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy topic to further investigate, Jeff. And if you can circulate that news report that you read about coho salmon, I think immediately brings up the question to me of tires at room temperature. We certainly have many more tires, probably in the parking lots going in and out and on our roadways. So I think having a better understanding of what kind of impacts they have, in a more global sense within the community is important too, in weighing the concerns you brought up. But it's certainly worth investigating. And if there's the opportunity to avoid such chemicals by making sure the supplier provides a different product, we certainly should look into that.
Yeah, I'll circulate it. We can discuss it further. It's an interesting question. My understanding is that basically all artificial turf has as a component part, recycled used tires. And yes, you're right. They do throw off particles and chemicals from driving. The reason it's a concern here is because that location is a water recharge overlay zone district, and that's I think a caution flag.
Sure.
And another article that I think has more local impact, which I will also share, was that recently in December in Boston, Massachusetts did a study, an analysis of a mosquito spray that they're using, that we use in Suffolk County, that the DPC uses in Suffolk County. And in that spray, they determined that they did have amounts of PFOs and PFOAs, which are those forever chemicals that polluted the groundwater in Wainscott. And it's, I think, a reason for caution. And I'm going to prepare a letter to the Suffolk County Legislature and to raise the question about the product, which is Anvil 10+10. That's the same pesticide we use, and I can circulate that around to the town if anybody else wants to sign it. Just
When you say the same pesticide that we use, you mean the county, because we don't.
I'm sorry.
I think you got to be very clear about that, because somebody get the wrong idea. Plus, we've actually already addressed this specific issue to the county legislature and vector control, because we know that those chemicals contain the PFOA, PFOS that you've referred to. That has been, we've actually asked them not to use the chemicals at all.
Yeah, I don't think that was because
not even the trace. Anvil is one of those products that they use. So, I think it's important that I agree with you. If we want to draft and send another letter, we can do that.
Yeah, we've addressed that, not using Anvil to vector control. I don't think we've raised the issue that they have PFOs and PFOA.
Well, some of us on the board were aware of that at the time.
Well, I guess you didn't share that with the board. At any rate, I'll circulate a letter if people are interested in signing that as well.
I didn't say who those persons were, but thanks, Jeff. We appreciate that. Are you done with your liaison report?
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I have.
So in preparation for increased manufacture and distribution of vaccine, David, Lisa, and I have been working on preparing a dedicated vaccination site within the town of East Hampton. As I've mentioned to my fellow board members before, the CDCH building is the facility that we're looking at, and it has many attributes that make it an ideal site. In our opinion, we reached out and engaged the East Hampton Healthcare Foundation and some local healthcare providers to do a tour and to point out anything that might be inconsistent or obstacles with that physical site. It was embraced as being an excellent location to prepare a mass vaccination site dedicated just to vaccines. It's isolated from other activities. It wouldn't interfere with other businesses and doctors' practices. At this point, the game plan is to continue preparing the physical location and providing all the resources that we would need on site. We're asking members of the community who are eligible and certified to administer vaccine to please call my office, the supervisor's office. We'll put your name on a spreadsheet with contact information. Anyone who's interested in volunteering to do clerical work as far as the record keeping and keeping up with the logging of vaccine distribution. There are a number of requirements that have to be met. So we'll need some clerical staff to help out. I'm prepared to, provide volunteers from the town or to pay staff to do so if we end up with a shortfall to make sure that this happens. We'll also need people to help with circulation and crowd control, if you will, so that people entering the site will be directed to the appropriate line, and that working out all of that flow process ahead of time and communicating with the healthcare professionals who that would be administering vaccine. There are a number of custody requirements with the vaccine. And right now we're talking about the Moderna vaccine. It requires, to be frozen and kept frozen until prepared for distribution. And so we're working through all those details. I think, it's very promising. I've spoken with at least one local fire commissioner who has a number of EMTs. I'm surprised the Montauk Fire Department has 29 EMTs, which is pretty remarkable. A number of those folks are in the process of being certified or have been certified to give vaccine, and it brought up the question of potential for also having a satellite or a mobile vaccination site that would be at either the firehouse or the playhouse in Montauk once enough vaccine becomes available. I think it's really important to focus on a centralized, large capacity location, because in reaching out to the state to get doses delivered, I think the high capacity makes it much more interesting to the state. They obviously want to get the vaccine out the door and distribute it as widely and as quickly as possible. I think that gives us something of an advantage over some of the other disadvantages we have. It kind of mitigates them being geographically distant. I keep insisting that the state take notice of the fact that our population here shouldn't be calculated based on the 2010 census, that we, as David said earlier, based on a number of metrics, we think that the population is closer to 75 or 80,000 people right now in town. So we want to make sure that we're getting an appropriate share of vaccine when it does get circulated. So I have to say I'm really enthusiastic. The response that I've gotten from local healthcare professionals, the Healthcare Foundation, East Hampton Healthcare, and others. I've had conversations with the hospital. Obviously, they have a business of their own to attend to, just taking care of people who are sick, need surgery and whatnot. So as much as we can take on the burden of providing a dedicated vaccine site, I think we'll be in much better position once vaccines do become available. I know that in speaking with people who are eligible now and have been trying to schedule appointments, it's quite frustrating, given that, this week, New York State, which was getting 300,000 doses a week, is getting 250,000 doses, and they have 7 million New Yorkers now are eligible to receive the vaccine. So you can see that there is a lot of demand. One of the seniors who had been corresponding with me, I kept urging her, just keep trying and don't pass up an opportunity to get vaccinated based on whether or not it's convenient. Figure out how to get there and get the vaccine. You may not know when the next opportunity will be. She finally got back to me after the following day saying that she spent 8 hours on 3 different devices trying to get through and get a date. She finally was able to get a date. She said she felt like she'd won the lottery, even though the appointment's for April 11th. So, depending on where you can go on the website, state's website, and we have the links to that on our town website, ehamptonny.gov. You can see the links, you can pull it up, and you can see which locations actually have availability to schedule an appointment. And it's a little bit hit or miss. I know this individual had gotten an appointment at Stony Brook, but I know people who've gone to the Javits Center. I know people who've gone to Jones Beach. So, hang in there. I think things will improve once we get another vaccine approved. Johnson & Johnson, I think, is less than 2 weeks away from possibly being certified under emergency regs of CDC. And once that's available to be distributed. That's a single dose vaccine. It does not require freezer. It can be just refrigerated in a household style refrigerator. And obviously with a single dose, that means many more people can be vaccinated quickly. David and I have also been working on testing center expansion, potentially in Montauk, put a second site for testing. And I just want to thank David for all the work he's done on both these efforts, being liaison to buildings and grounds, working with our town staff to prepare CDCH. It's really been a fantastic job you've done, David. I really want to thank you for all your efforts. And with the testing that we have here at Town Hall, that's become more and more efficient. There are still some issues with turning test results around quickly. That's I think symptomatic from just the vast quantities of tests coming into the laboratories. Testing that could be turned around in 12 to 24 hours. In some cases, it's now several days. We urge you to, try and be patient and stay safe while you're waiting for your results. But that's running a lot smoother. I had somebody contact me yesterday and say that they've been tested many times already in several different places. They thought it was the most professionally run operation. We did have a huge influx, and I heard anecdotally that we attracted a lot of the people that had been going to Southampton to a practice there to get tested, and that the practice there, there was no line at all now. So I still think there's going to be increasing and continuing demand throughout the community, and being able to provide testing as broadly as possible has always been a goal since the beginning of the pandemic. So we look forward to developments on that second testing center. It does require reaching out to New York State Parks, given that the location, we have an agreement with the state parks over that location already, and it may be simply amending that agreement, or anyway, we need to work on that. But that's pretty much what I have right now. The COVID numbers, Sylvia was talking about that. She heard from Robert Ross from the hospital and gave a report on, the number of people in the hospital that, had coronavirus and how many were in ICU and whatnot. As far as within Suffolk County right now, the numbers have been post Thanksgiving, they've been running anywhere from 8 to 11% positive of those tests being given in the countywide. The last numbers I have that I see here, I think, are for the 16th, and there were 7.6. There does seem to be a very slight leveling off at the moment of the post holidays, and if you count backwards, you can see from New Year's now we're getting beyond the holiday season. And that surge that we saw earlier has subsided a little bit, but the numbers are still quite high. There also are additional concerns about the spreading of the more virulent strains that have turned up. The one from the UK in particular, it is in New York State. There have been confirmed cases on Long Island. And from what I've read, it's expected to be the dominant strain within the country by March. It spreads about twice as fast. And while 10 minutes of exposure and 1,000 droplets or whatever that metric was that was required for transmission in the initial virus, that this one is half the time and half the number of droplets. It's twice as contagious. So I urge everyone to continue to be quite diligent about all the safety precautions, the mask wearing, sanitizing your hands and surfaces, and trying not to spend unnecessary time around other people outside of your own household. Make your visits to grocery store, essential stops as brief as possible, and just be really cognizant about whether or not you touch things, and washing your hands before you touch your face and that sort of thing, face and eyes. We're not through this yet, and I think the predictions are that this is still going to get worse before it gets better. So hang in there, everybody, and try and be safe until you can get vaccinated. And that's all I have for liaison report.
Excuse me, Mr. Supervisor, we have 3 callers if you're interested.
Yes, let's take public comment at this point. Michael, if you cue them in.
Sure, I'll unmute the first caller. Last 4 digits are 2333. Unmuting now.
Hi, it's Mike Mahoney calling. Thank you, Peter and the board. And I was on earlier, but I never got called upon. I had just a couple of questions. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Could you state your name, please?
Yeah, Michael Mahoney.
Oh, hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I hope you're well and everybody else. When I was on earlier, I never got called on, but I had a couple of questions on the easement and a couple of other questions outside of the easement. And I listened to you explain to Carolyn Logan, the Article 7 does not require the signing of the easement at this time. And to my knowledge, from you, as well as when I spoke with Orsted, it doesn't delay the project from being completed on time when that easement agreement is signed. So with that in mind, I can't understand, and perhaps you can tell me, why you feel you need to sign this easement agreement now and not wait until after the Article 7 is completed.
Well, I would say...
Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, there are a couple things there. For one, we've worked continuously and diligently on this agreement, reviewing the portion that's on land, and to ensure that regardless of what the PSC ultimately decides will be required, that we address and ensure that our standards and our requirements will be in addition to whatever the PSC decides. And frankly, I want to just get the work done because it's a continual process, and be able to focus, frankly, on a number of other pressing issues that we are trying to address. It takes up a certain amount of the town's bandwidth. It takes time away in exec sessions, negotiating. I think we're at the end of that process, that particular aspect of this process. And because these agreements are contingent upon the successful completion of both the PSC and the BOEM certificates, I see no reason in delaying and waiting what might be months before we revisit. So I just want to conclude the business and move on.
But in that delay process, we may learn more that wants to be added to that easement agreement. That's a possibility. So I don't see any easement. Wonderful. You have something.
Well, I mean, conversely, those requirements could still be added to the PSC certificate as well. So it's not like this is the last opportunity to shape the outcome here.
I just want to jump in and say, I think that the delay has had exactly the effect that the caller is talking about. That it has educated us, it's given us more detail, and it's it's not the same that they can be put in the conditions of the Article 7. The easement is going to control the agreement largely. Why jump into it when you could learn more? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that you characterized it as a delay, because I always thought that it was just the continual process of negotiating and moving forward to address the issues. I'm not sure where the delay is that you're referring.
I'm saying a better choice of words would have been, well, I don't understand why we are not refraining from signing, because in every instance, the time that's gone by has given us more detail, more facts, and we're better educated. And we might, there also is the possibility there may be conflicts. We may disagree with with the applicant at some point. It just seems to me you don't
Well, you've made that point
prematurely conclude your
abundantly clear.
negotiation.
We're not going to settle that disagreement between us. You've made it abundantly clear, and I don't think that the rest of the board holds the same view.
Got it. I just wanted to make the point in response to the call.
I appreciate you making it yet again, Jeff. Thank you. And Michael, thank you for calling.
I'm Peter. I'm not done. I have a couple of other questions. I heard where the governor now wants to get the restaurants open again and the businesses open again, which I'm grateful to see for all of those hardworking individuals. Has the town taken any steps towards seeing that happen as far as getting our restaurants reopened and other small businesses reopened and give those people a chance to earn a living?
Michael, our restaurants haven't been closed, and we've worked since the very beginning of the pandemic through our business recovery committee to ensure that businesses did get open as soon as possible and that they were adhering to the health and safety protocols in reopening. There are restaurants that are open. Not every restaurant is open. I mean, we have had, sadly, I think some businesses that have closed perhaps permanently. There are some businesses that never opened really. I think of like the Stephen Buck House. They really haven't been able to open. All of this has been controlled by the governor's office, and we've just been implementing the directives and doing everything we can to ensure that our businesses survive this period.
Yeah, Mr. Mahoney must be in New York City, because in New York City, the restaurants, I believed, were closed. But out here in East Hampton, we have tried to keep them open at reduced capacity. They've also been very good at putting up barriers between tables, and thank them for that. They've invested in making sure that customers are safe. Their takeout businesses seem to be doing quite well, and we encourage everyone to use takeout if they want to have a meal out, or if they feel comfortable in a restaurant that has put up these barriers, and everyone I've been in has done that, or the distancing is really good. So I want to thank our restaurants for staying open, for serving the community, and for being part of our community that keeps moving forward as we try to keep as much normal as is possible here in East Hampton.
That's excellent. But so our restaurants and bars now can stay open beyond 9 o'clock at night?
I believe
10 o'clock.
The 10 time was 10.
10 o'clock. So,
and those.
When are they going to be allowed to go back to normal hours?
Well, we don't know, Michael, and it's really not up to us to be able to do that. The governor has superseded the local authority here in terms of how this works. I would say that right now we have a higher infection rate than we did when we were under full lockdown in the spring. So, I think
correct. And there's a lot of argument. Correct. There's a lot of argument. Correct. And there's a lot of arguments that lockdown didn't.
So
okay.
we need to.
And there's an argument that a lot.
Go ahead, Michael.
It's kind of hard. And there's also a lot of arguments that the lockdowns didn't do any good. But I thank you for your time, and I'm just going to go back and say to you, I have yet to hear any sound reason as to why this easement agreement needs to be signed now when it's not required, and it's not going to delay the project according to the developer when I asked them that question. I do think you will learn more and you will strengthen your negotiation.
Thank you for your comments. I just want to add on that with regard to businesses staying open or being reopened, it's a very, very fine line that we have to tread between, public health and the health of people's pocketbooks. If people are forced to work, obviously because of the economic situation, then they're at greater risk. And at the same time, their businesses have to be able to survive this. They employ lots of people. They're fabric of our community. We need to walk that very careful line between conducting commerce and protecting public health. And that line is going to shift towards greater lockdown, if we continue to see more infection, and if we can get the infection rates under control, and hopefully with vaccine, we'll see more liberalization in terms of numbers of people that can gather, and other, kind of businesses that include the gathering of large numbers, movie theaters, Broadway, our entertainment venues. So we look forward to that. We're still pretty far away from that, I think.
Our health plus, yes, we all look forward to that, and we can agree that it needs to happen, and we can also agree to disagree possibly. But there's serious evidence that lockdowns have not slowed the spread of this COVID-19, both here and abroad. That being said, I do thank you for your time, and I wish you well. Stay safe.
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate those kind words and wishes. And the lockdowns only work if everybody participates. That was a problem. Lockdowns got politicized. Half the people going around in some states weren't wearing masks. We see in countries like Taiwan, they've been COVID-free since April. They are, conducting business and dining out and doing everything that they do, because of their response, their unified response, and the general acceptance of the public to follow science and medical professionals' advice. We don't have that same kind of adherence to direction here. We're the land of the free, and people do as they want. And in this particular case, that leads us to be, I think, 25% of the mortality from this pandemic has occurred in the United States worldwide. So that is a truly grim and gruesome statistic. I'm hoping that we can do better as a country and have a more unified approach to beating this disease. I'm hopeful that that's coming now, and that there will be cooperation across all levels of government to put this behind us. It's absolutely crucial to our local economies and our national economy, and the safety and health and well-being of all of us. We have any other callers on the line?
Yes, we do. I'll unmute the next caller. The last 4 digits are 8764. Unmuting now.
Good afternoon. This is David Buddha. I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone. I've been away for a while, so my first opportunity to do so. I have a couple of comments. Thank you. I have a couple of comments that are derived from things that were discussed today, and a couple of other comments. I'll try to be as brief as possible. First, with regard to the CPF Management Stewardship Plan, I want to remind the board that you're approaching the 10-year anniversary of the adoption of the CPF project plan, and everyone involved in using that plan, I think, has a consensus view that it's long overdue to be reviewed and revised as appropriate. And one of the most obvious things is that back in 2011, there was no such thing as the CPF even considering acquiring a property that had improvements on it. And that now seems to be the mainstay of what you acquire, or at least a frequent occurrence. And I really think it would aid you in focusing your CPF funds, which now are fortunately abundant, on those properties that are most worthy, that might have improvements that are most worthy of being acquired. So this is just a plug for consideration for revising and updating the 2011 CPF project plan. That's one. Two, I want to thank Carol and the Tax Receiver's Office for posting on the town website on January 6th the final version of the tax tabular statement, which I think is a valuable tool for residents of the entire town to appreciate and understand how their tax rate compares with other hamlets, as influenced primarily, the difference being primarily the differences in the school district tax rates, and also some differences caused by the fire district rates as well. So that's number two. Actually, I should also follow up. I hope in the future we'll get back in the habit of including, as was done for a couple of years, a copy of the tax tabular statement in with the tax bill. It used to be for a couple of years. It was provided to every resident, every taxpayer, by making it the back of the instructions for payment of taxes, and it could have been done this year, but it wasn't done. I think that was an oversight. Item 3, and I'm glad to see John's back with us, at least on the screen. Probably he never left, but he's one of the people on the screen. I want to throw some cold water on John's presentation concerning the UR Road abandonment moratorium. I think what was proposed was not well explained, and I think that you're suggesting taking a sledgehammer approach when a scalpel may be what's all that's appropriate. I think that when you have had moratoriums in the past, and by the way, the existence of the 1977 Town Board approved old map study file was established property rights, and you would no sooner willy-nilly cancel or delay the exercise of property rights than you would the issuance of building permits. So when, for example, you had reason to adopt a moratorium that affected commercial properties in Wainscott, you didn't just ban building permits across the town. I think what you need to do, and there are 3 things that were mentioned today, all of which are worth preserving and protecting: the town's ability to perhaps use roads that are designated as to be abandoned for accessing other town lands. There was a mention of the need for perhaps using some of those roads for pedestrian trails and also for wildlife trails. But that cannot possibly affect all 42 maps, and there are 42 of them if you count all the large maps that were broken down to 2 sheets. I think what you need to do is make available, and I'm asking now, that if there was a planning department study that identified a problem and specified what the solutions were, that you make that available to the public before you schedule a public hearing so that people can understand why you're moving willy-nilly to consider a public hearing on the total restriction for up to maybe 6 months of all abandonments of roads that are identified in the old filed map study plan. People who are buying up vacant properties that may be adjacent to roadways are depending on and expecting to be able to go through the abandonment process to incorporate those roads that were determined for 20 years ago to no longer be needed, 30 years ago. And I think that you should be more careful how to proceed. And certainly a 6-month moratorium for all maps, for all potential road abandonments is overkill, and I think it's unwarranted. One last topic, and this is one that's wasn't discussed today, but it keeps coming up, and I'd like John and perhaps also Nancy Lynn to take a close look at this. Over the years, I've noticed many situations where private property owners, not understanding that their property ends at the end of their deeded property, and that they often take advantage of the anywhere from 5, 8, or 10 feet between the road edge and their beginning of their property to build impediments, structures, fences, walls, boulders, things that are dangerous to the pedestrians and motorists that use the roads. I did notice that on your website, I forgot whether it was under the ordinance enforcement or someplace else, it may have been in the highway department, there was a notice of violation which explains, and this is a town law, it's a violation to place or plant any object or material within the town-owned right-of-way. This area must be kept clear in the event that the highway department workers or the utility companies need to work on underground or overhead utilities. And I can skip a section, it's not really relevant. For public safety and for children walking to school, as well as other pedestrians and bicycles, this right-of-way needs to be free of obstruction. This includes fencing, rocks, and any type of hard structure. Please do not place leaves or any other material on storm drains. If possible, keep these areas clear of debris. If you're unable to do so, please notify the highway department. These procedures will help to prevent flooding issues. Well, that comes right from the town website. Comes right from the town code. But there are a couple of glitches, and this is what I'd like the town attorney office to address. I see no reason why that law, that procedure, that notice of violation should not apply for homeowners who border roads that are not part of the highway system. When in the old filed map areas, those reserved areas for roads, which may or may not have been improved up to this time, were created for the public user and create rights of the public to keep those rights of way clear and free. And it shouldn't matter whether you put that you should be prohibited from putting a boulder right up at the road edge, whether it's a public highway or whether it's not a public highway. I don't see a distinction. I don't see, it's the same safety issue. It's the same legal issue as far as I'm concerned, even though the road may not have the status of being part of the town highway system. By the way, there are roadways that are ready to be adopted, to be incorporated into the town highway system, but the town highway department seems to have been resistant over the years to do so. They seem not to want to take on the responsibility, even for those roads that have a 50-foot right-of-way, have been fully paved, have been improved, and it's time to take a look at that. So I wish that someone would take a look at that and act upon it, because I think it's a matter of public safety. And every time I see people posting fences and obstructions, any hard structures other than maybe the landscaping, which everyone tolerates, every time I see people building fences ahead of their property line, because you can usually see the new property owners have their property staked, and then they then they put their fences 5 or 10 feet in front of their property line. And it bothers me that oftentimes the town does not act upon that. One last thing. There seems to be, over the years, there was a bad practice where the highway department was asked to issue letters approving and saying that we don't have any objection to those pillars, columns, obstructions that were placed in the highway right-of-way. And I know Nancy Lynn, in several instances, was very strict about saying the town highway department has no right to do that. We're not going to let them, those letters are meaningless. And yet 2 of your assistant town attorneys who have worked in the past months for the ARB have sanctioned such letters or referred to them as being legitimate excuses for property owners to invade the town right-of-way. Someone needs to get a consistent town approach to the issue of whether or not the town highway department has any right to authorize violations of the town law. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you very much for your patience and listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I have a couple of comments on the last 2 issues you brought up. One was the road shoulder and your objections to structures and taking over the right-of-way with hedges or plantings or rock fences, you name it. I agree that is a safety issue. We don't have sidewalks in much of our community, and having a clear shoulder for pedestrians to be off the pavement, joggers, whatever, is necessary. And so I agree with that. Also, if you have specific instances that you keep referring to about roadways in the UR maps that are complete and up to town specs that the town has not yet adopted into the highway system, would you please make me aware of where they are so that I can follow up on that? I'm not personally aware of any. So again, if there are some that you think do meet the town highway specs and should be adopted, if you can make me aware of those, I'm happy to follow up on it.
Well, the one that I could do right away, because I brought it up years ago to Tom Talmadge and to the Highway Department, and that's the portion of Harborview Drive from 3 Mile Harbor Road to where there was a subdivision, and that roadway was fully repaved. It has 50-foot right-of-way. It has all of its drainage in place, and my requests over the years has just fallen on deaf ears.
Okay, well, I will follow up on that and find out why it's not been accepted. There may be a very good reason why. Appreciate you taking the time to call us.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Do we have any other callers on the line, Michael?
Yes, we do. I'll unmute the next caller right now. The last 4 digits are 5016. Unmuting now. Hello, caller. Last digits 5016. Are you there?
I'm here.
You're live with the town board.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it's Katie Casey calling in.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hello. I'm
We can
well.
hear
How are
you.
you?
Very well, thanks.
Okay, good. I'm calling in because it was mentioned to me somewhat after the fact that there may have been some discussion pertaining the housing authority, and I'm not calling to ask you to rehash it or at this point I have to go back and watch the video to see the discussion. But I wanted to call in and make myself available if any of the board members had questions for me.
Any board members have any questions on that issue that we discussed earlier? I don't. I just, I would hope that we would have really clear communication back and forth. That your efforts and that of the rest of the housing authority are really vital, and we think you're doing a great job. Very pleased to see your most recent project in the final stages of basically being habitated, and the efforts to create more affordable housing within the town is something the town board has long supported. So again, we appreciate all of your efforts, and we stand ready and willing to help as soon as we are aware that help is needed.
And I very much appreciate that. I will go back and watch the video again. I don't want you to rehash, but the purpose of my calling is to just sort of demonstrate my appreciation for those town officials that get back to me and always have provided what we have requested or needed in a timely fashion. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and we're happy to continue doing that.
Okay. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Be well. Do we have any other callers?
No, we do not.
Michael?
No, we do not have any more callers.
No other callers, then we'll...
Can I just let folks know that the town's email is down? We're not, I know, for instance, my email hasn't refreshed since about 12:15. I experienced a similar situation over the weekend, and IT is looking into it.
I was hoping there was just a lull in the email. That explains it. So instead of coming in one every 5 minutes, I've had a break here for an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the explanation for that. Thank you for that, Kathy. At this point, we do have a few resolutions to do before we go into executive session.
I'd like to offer resolution 2021-158. This is to amend the resolution 2020-965, and this is to appoint Julie Evans, fishery consultant for the calendar year 2021, an hourly rate of $55 yearly, not to exceed $20,000 for work that's been performed, including travel, hotel accommodations, electronic and video conferencing consultancy with the FAC members, and all other allowable expenses incurred upon submission of proper documentation in compliance with the town's travel and reimbursement policy for vendors with vendors.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passed and carried. Resolution 159 is Jeff.
Yeah, this is an amendment to a resolution. We paid an overdue balance to Verizon in the amount of $77, and this resolution would modify the source of the payment, moving it from subcontract costs to telephone costs in the amount of $70.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passed and carried. Resolution 160 is to authorize payment of an invoice to the East Hampton Star in the amount of $1,500.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. Resolution 161 is a budget modification for insurance. And that would be moving $29,500 from contingent line insurance in the same amount.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. John, we have some items to discuss in executive session today. You're on mute, John. I'm going to buy you that T-shirt that says unmute your phone.
You're on mute, John.
We do have a potential litigation, potential settlement to discuss.
I think we got personnel also.
Yeah, license agreements, CPF.
Yes, I
Anything else?
think there's anything else that I can think of.
All right, I make a motion that we go into exec session for litigation, personnel, and licensing agreements and CPF. And it's now 1:45, 2:15, 2:30,
2:30.
2:30.
2:30.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. Thank
Peter,
you.
how will you get that information to us for the link
All
or?
right.
Hopefully we'll have email by then, right?
That's a really good question. I probably could send it.
Can you do it on your phone?
I probably can send it on a different
You
device.
might have to use our personal, well, yeah, from your phone. May even have to go to our personal emails.
Well,
If it's
the link may go there, but
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wow.
or I can
Excuse
text
me,
it.
board, if you'd like, we can stay on after the meeting, but we can end this meeting and I can talk to you briefly.
Okay.
Just a
Yeah,
moment.
why don't we
Yeah.
do that
Are
just
we
in
done
case?
off the air?
If you can keep the meeting, close the meeting and then keep this link open.
All right.
Or
stand by.
do we go to executive session immediately to have that discussion?
Stand by and close this public meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe and be well, everyone.
What's the procedure here?
Okay, so we are off the air. I'm going to stop recording on Zoom.
Okay.
And if you guys need to use this link, you're welcome to. What I can do is transfer the host capacity from myself to Peter. And then
Okay.
Peter can take over the meeting.
Great.
I
Let's
will-
just do that.
I'll
Yeah.
leave
Let's
the
just
meeting
do that,
here.
Michael, and then we'll reconvene at 2:30. So we'll just leave this open until then.
Okay.
Sure.
Does that
so
work?
well, you can leave. Yeah. Peter, when you're done, I'm going to transfer the powers over to you as host. When you're done, just end the meeting.
I'll end the meeting. Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Just give me a minute. I'll tell
Appreciate
you
it.
when we're all set.
Yep. Appreciate all your help, Michael.
All right, I'm just gonna stop my video.
Okay. Yep.
Is it okay to just wait a minute, Peter?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick until you get it on. Till you get me to be host.
Yep. I just want to go over something technically with Jason real quick.